All right, today we're going to unpack a really powerful and, honestly, pretty unsettling parable. It's called The Sovereign Eid, and it tells the story of this figure, the Colossus, and his journey to a kind of power that's so absolute it literally reshapes the world around him. And this line right here, this is what kicks the whole thing off. It tells you right away that sovereignty, in this story, isn't about governing. It's an act of total, forceful transformation. We're not talking about ruling what's already there. We're talking about tearing it all down to build something new from pure will.
So, the story doesn't start with a battle or a coronation. It begins inside the mind, with a profound psychological break. This is the exact moment the Colossus stops seeing himself as just a part of the world and starts seeing himself as its master.
And you can really see that stark contrast here. On one hand, you have the laborer, right? Someone who works with the environment, who has to follow its rules. But then there's the godlike creator, who stands completely outside of it all, ready to impose a whole new, kind of terrible geometry of power. This wasn't a slow change, it was a sudden awakening.
So how did he claim this new authority? Well, it wasn't through any of the traditional symbols, like a crown or a scepter. No, his power was seized through direct physical action, what the text calls the unhesitating agency of his acts. It's the power to just act, to change the world without asking for permission.
And this is it. This is the core belief system that justifies every single swing of that axe. It's this idea that human desire is the most important thing, period. The mountains, the rivers, the forests, they aren't seen as living things. They're just physical obstacles that need to be crushed by the force of will.
Okay, so we've got the mindset down. Now we get to see what happens when that internal idea just explodes outward. The concept becomes a reality, and it gets written across the face of an entire continent. As the Colossus starts moving west, every single step he takes is basically a statement of ownership. His path becomes the literal blueprint for conquest. He's not exploring the land, he's commanding it. He treats the wilderness not like a home you'd respect, but like a frontier that's just there to be broken.
So, what does the world actually look like through the eyes of this new sovereign? Well, it pretty much becomes a checklist. Nature is completely reframed as just a list of assets. It's a raw material to be beaten into submission, a target for massive resource extraction. It's just a thing to be used up.
Wow, this might be the most powerful image in the entire text. It takes something as beautiful and majestic as the Great Lakes and just reduces it to a mere utility. Not a natural wonder, but just a simple drinking trough for his beast. It perfectly captures a worldview where nothing has any value beyond how useful it is right now.
So what is this raw, primal, unstoppable force that's driving the Colossus? The source material actually gives it a specific psychological name. It frames this whole conquest not just as history, but as a deep primal impulse. The text calls it the American id. Now, to get this, think of Freud's basic model of the psyche, right? The superego is our conscience, the laws, the morals. The ego is the practical part that deals with reality. But the id, well, the id is that raw, instinctual drive. It doesn't negotiate, it just wants. And this parable argues that this id became the real engine of expansion, completely overpowering any laws or politics that got in its way. And here we get to the core paradox of the id's work. You can't deny it's creating something new, a nation, an economy, a whole civilization. But that creation is, by its very nature, violent. Progress and destruction aren't two different things here. In this story, they are one and the same, totally inseparable. At its peak, this force isn't just a man anymore, or even a movement. It actually evolves into an ideology, a kind of national religion, where the number one belief is just domination. This is a belief system that, as the source says, does not negotiate with nature. It just transforms it.
And that brings us to the climax of the story. After all that conquering, after all that brutal creation, what's the ultimate reward? What is the true nature of the crown that he's finally won?
Turns out, the final prize wasn't the land, or the resources, or the wealth. It was the feeling, the pure, raw sensation of power itself. That ecstasy you get from imposing your will on the world and watching it bend.
But the parable immediately slams us with the consequence of that feeling. That ecstasy might be fleeting for the Colossus, but the result is permanent. The landscape is left with these deep, violent scars, a physical, lasting reminder of that moment of power.
And here we get the parable's final, chilling definition of power.
For the Colossus, real sovereignty was never about governing other people. It was the ultimate act of ego, successfully remaking the physical world into a perfect mirror of your own ambition. So to wrap this whole thing up, the source leaves us with one last incredibly potent metaphor that really captures the final outcome of the Ides reign.
Before we see the final image, just think about this question for a second. If your goal is perfect, total, absolute order, what has to be sacrificed to get there?
The text wants us to picture it, a giant steamroller. It's silent now. The engine is off. It has done its job perfectly. The ground beneath it is totally flat, paved, and ordered.
And there's the cost. The cost of that perfect order was, well, everything that gave the land its character in the first place. The steamroller won, but it only won by completely obliterating the very texture of the world it was trying to control. Total order required the total destruction of what came before.
So what kind of kingdom does this sovereign build in the end? One that values these three things above everything else. And in a world that's built for scale, speed, and efficiency, there's just not much room left for things that are complex, or slow, or wild.
And that's the final, kind of haunting question the parable leaves us with. Is this just a story about the past, or is this sovereign id, this steamroller mindset, is it a recurring, unexamined blueprint that we might still see at work today in our own constant push for growth and efficiency, no matter the cost?